So uh, Revelation gives us two resurrections, the first and the second, and two deaths, the first and the second. And it's a fantastic little riddle. In fact, if you want to write it out, it goes first resurrection, first death, second resurrection, second death. And you either get the first three or the last three. So what are they? It turns out that everybody gets the second death and everybody gets the first resurrection. And that refers to the body. Sorry, I should give you a chance to pause and to sort of work it out, the riddle yourself. But here's the solution. The first death is the death of the body, the separation of body and soul, what we experience when our heart stops or whatever. The first resurrection is the bodily resurrection, what happens when Jesus returns in glory and our bodies and souls are put back together. And everybody participates in both of those. Every single person will die, and every single person will be raised, believer and unbeliever alike. But the first resurrection happens, in fact, before you die, and that's the spiritual resurrection. And the second death happens after you're raised, and that's the eternal death in condemnation. And so those who participate in the first resurrection don't participate in the second death. I should draw a picture. Well, I've got a picture. I'm not sure if it helps. But there's our resurrection 1, death 1, resurrection 2, death 2. And this is what happens to the body. You die and then you're raised. Every single person, believer and unbeliever, die and then are raised. But if you participate in the first resurrection, then you don't participate in the second death. But if you don't participate in the first resurrection, then you do participate in the second death. Okay? So that leads, the key then is this first resurrection. And how do we participate in the first resurrection? What is it? And for that, I want to turn to Romans chapter 6, where Paul says, therefore, we are buried with him, Jesus, by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. This is the first resurrection. Your baptism, your faith in Christ, you're being born again, so that you're already, Paul says in Ephesians 6, raised with Christ and seated with him in the glory of the Father. And that means that the baptized, can you imagine this, that the baptized will not die forever. You're already raised. God be praised. So that little riddle is a riddle of great comfort and great peace. Thank you so much for the question.
So here we are to 20 Revelations. This is kind of what this whole concept that if, in terms of the millennial reign, if it's happened, this is where we are. Okay, this is where we're up to in the story, which means we are pretty much near the end. And all those people we see who are stereotypically holding up signs on street corners saying the end is nigh, perhaps we're a lot closer to the truth of that matter than we initially thought they were stereotypically. Maybe they didn't even know what they truly meant when they were saying the end is nigh, but people would dream dreams and have visions during this time. And it says here, Satan is bound in the abyss for 1,000 years. The saints who died are resurrected and begin their 1,000-year reign with Christ. After the 1,000 years, Satan is released from the abyss to deceive the nations and gather Gog and Magog and the people of the world to encircle the camp of saints and the city of Jerusalem. Fire comes down from God out of heaven and devours them, and Satan is destroyed, finally. The wicked dead and all those who died during the 1,000-year reign of Christ are resurrected and judged. Now, this description here on Wikipedia actually doesn't explain clearly what was actually said in Revelations 20. we go to it, and this translation is from the KJV, okay? And I'm not here to argue about what is and isn't the right book to use, but let's just read this together, okay? So, Revelations 20, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witnesses of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which they had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had they received the marks on their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So this is the millennial kingdom. And those who get to be in the millennial kingdom were the martyrs for Jesus, and those who saw him during his time and lived with him and were beheaded for his sake and killed for his sake, you know. But it says here, this is an interesting verse. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. So I've highlighted it here. But then it mysteriously says, this is the first resurrection. But then after that, in the next verse, in 6, it says, blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. They shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So listen to that. And it says, when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years. So the rest of the dead are somehow born again into the world. Their souls are in some way, it's like they've been stored somewhere, and they get to come back, but they have to live during Satan's little moment. You know, that's what I'm saying here. And it's all hinged on this section, in Revelations 5 through to 7. All of Revelations 20 really is what it's talking about here, but it mainly starts with, you know, people get to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Blessed are those that get to take part in the first resurrection, because they get to be with Christ for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. And then the rest of the dead get to come back after the 1,000 years, when Christ is no longer reigning, and they get to be in a little season where he's loosed out of his prison, where Satan is loosed. And it says, Satan shall go out and deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. Now, deceive the nations. You know, if this is true, then it makes sense that why we're so confused about who we are and when we are. We don't know what peoples we actually are. We've been utterly lied to about our history and our origins through scientism and obviously other manipulated religions out there and lies. Our timeline is completely messed up. In terms of deceive the nations, Satan has done just that, if that's where we live, if we are in his little season. We are utterly, completely lost. We have no idea who we are or when we are. And we barely even understand where we are, considering all the deceptions around, you know, the heliocentric model and the rest. We don't really know anything about existence at all. We've been utterly deceived during this time, and our history books are utter lies. So it's implying that those who do come back to live in Satan's little kingdom after the 1,000 years, as mentioned here, aren't resurrected in a sense as adults who can think consciously. It's almost like they're born again into the world. It's like as the world repopulates during this 1,000 years, you know, it's like these babies or infants are born into the world, and as they grow older, they fully come into who they are, you know, like we do, like every human being you've ever met does in this world, you know. We're all raised from a baby, aren't we? From a mother and child. And I find it interesting that there's this phenomena researched by all the other people in the Tartaria, but there's these orphan trains where thousands of children are just appearing out of nowhere and being made to repopulate these cities, you know. Maybe it's all adding up. Maybe that is what was going on. Maybe that's what this is talking about, and where all these children just randomly appeared from. It's actually, they were kind of just birthed into the earth in a way. And, you know, they weren't resurrected as fully grown adults, which is what the resurrection implies would happen. These people who the rest of the dead live not again are people who have to live a full life again from birth till death, you know. So they're not resurrected, more so re-injected into the earth. The soul is implanted back into it through the birthing process. Okay, but I think after all this destruction, after the final battle, where they encircle the camp of saints and are burnt by God, I'm guessing that's when the final second resurrection truly happens. And everybody who died is resurrected in the form as they were. So adults and children in between of all ages and sizes, whatever, they're all just literally brought back from the dead and manifest in front of God there, you know, and that's the final judgment. A lot of people instead, alternative to this, are obviously waiting for the millennial kingdom to happen. They're waiting for all of the revelation, the end times events to happen. They're waiting for all the trumpets to be blown and the vials to be poured, you know, and the seals to be broken. They're waiting for the mark of the beast still and all this stuff, you know. And this conspiracy is saying you're waiting for the wrong thing. It's already happened. You've just been utterly lied to about where you stand in the time period, you know. Our history has been utterly expunged and twisted and lied to. And it's fascinating, like I said at the start, it does seem, through basic observation, never mind following just scripture or what's written down in books, just observing the earth, something absolutely awful happened that melted cities, leveled landscapes, buried people and cultures, just reset the earth. You know, I think it's said there's no tree on the earth that's over like 300, 400 years old or something like that. I heard someone say. This goes back to that really old theory, you know, there's no trees on flat earth argument. And that's what he was kind of trying to explain, you know. All the trees are new. Like everything so it's implying everything's pointing towards something happened, and you know, the New Age types and the Gnostic types call it the Great Reset. The Christians call it the end times revelation event, and then the millennial reign. Just an interesting tidbit, you know, there is this idea that there is evidence for this through the architecture that was around, all this wonderful architecture that people struggle to understand how we managed to build, especially during a time when everyone was using horses and carriages. These epically large, intricate designed buildings, you know. Well, the stones have a date marked on them usually. And for one example, there's loads of stones out there that look like they have something like 1760 written on there. But on closer inspection, the 1 is an I. It's not a number, it's a letter, for example. So this means, for, you know, that saying that was actually saying this is the year 760 of the Lord. I being a replacement for J for Jesus, which wasn't around then, you know. So it's I 760, not 1760. And this is kind of what they've been doing. They've been defacing all these stones and adding 1s in front of them. So we think we're living in we're living in the year 2000, when really we might be living in the year 1000, just a couple of 100 years after the great reign of Jesus Christ, you know. But again, we wouldn't know what year we're actually in if this is true. It means they've literally just given us a random arbitrary date and said, yeah, that's when you live, you know, and we've just believed it.
So this is the destruction event, right? Now, is there a 1,000-year period when Jesus returns? There's this massive destruction event, but it's followed by a 1,000-year period. Well, what happens after the fall of the Western Roman Empire? What do you know? You have a 1,000-year period of time called the Dark Ages. And isn't that just the controller way to do things? Completely potentially invert this 1,000-year reign of Christ by calling it the Dark Ages. And so roughly speaking, the Dark Ages correspond to the Middle Ages. I think most of the history we have here is fake anyway, But I am aware that a lot of the timeline has been manipulated. A lot of years have probably been added. And I know we switched to the Gregorian calendar, I think, in the late 1500s. And you also had this phenomena where for a while prior to like 1800, they were putting an I or a J in front of a date, and that I would represent Jesus or Jesus, or the J would represent Jesus. So it would be, the date would be like how much time had passed since the death of Jesus. So what I wanted to point out here is this desk is it's referred to as the King's Desk. And this desk is in the Palace of Versailles, and it was made, we're told, for King Louis I believe this one was made for King Louis XV in 1769. Now, the person who made this desk, he put his inscription in there, and his name was Jean-Henri Reisner. And when you look at the date on this, it's a J, 769. But when you look at the official history for this desk, it'll say 1769, but this is supposed to be a J. And if you look at this Jean-Henri Reisner, you look at his birth, date of birth and death, it's again 1734 to 1806. So you go back here, so they're taking this to be a 1. So when I look at this period of time, I understand that from our current year 0 to now 2020 years, there's probably a good chunk of that has been added. But it's still, I think they're probably doing that to cover up this 1,000-year period of time, and a good portion of it has probably been chucked into this period of time we know as the Dark Ages. So, and we also have these mile markers. This is for Boston, and this is just another example. The I, 734, and here's one I, here's another I, here's another I. So it's after Jesus, after Jesus. Clearly an I, not a 1, but we would be told this is 1734. So the calendars are heavily manipulated, but so we have the destruction event worldwide potentially, and we have this 1,000-year period potentially.
This great deception is built on the biggest of lies, if this is true. And I don't want to say with any authority, I'm not a Millennial Kingdom or a Tartarian channel. But I can't ignore this theory knocking about everywhere, because people are losing themselves to it and obsessing over it to the point where, that it's one of those reality shifters again. This is as big as the flat earth or the Mandela effect in terms of like how much it really got into people's heads and mixed them up. And we have to be careful. We're not supposed to have a spirit of fear, and I know a lot of people are really clinging on as well to the idea that they're about to get taken up into heaven and don't have to deal with all the pain and suffering, but if this little kingdom thing is true, then that's just not going to happen. Unfortunately, we're not in that time, and people say, well, there's so many signs are happening right now that prove this is end times about to happen, and we are about to be taken up, and Jesus is about to come back, and rule for 1,000 years. And it's kind of, we can see the signs. It's kind of like, well, the devil can make up signs. The devil can perform signs and wonders. He can make it look like Revelations is unfolding before your eyes, even though it's already happened. He can do that. It's well within his power and ability, So just be open to the fact that you could be being massively deceived. Keep your eyes and faith, I suppose, in Jesus.
So here's where we come in. So Satan is, after the 1,000-year reign, Satan is loosed, and there is a second resurrection. And here's where we come in, I think. I think this is where we come in. Here's a verse. Again, we're in the book of Revelation. But the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. So there's another resurrection that happens. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan's going to be loosed, and he's going to go out and deceive the nations. And there's going to be a final battle with a large amount of people, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So it's food for thought. Like, how would, after this 1,000-year reign with Jesus himself being on earth and these saints, these people with glorified bodies mixed in with people of normal physiologies, how would Satan be able to deceive the nations? I mean, but maybe those, because we don't see these people with these glorified bodies and Jesus, they're not around. So maybe at the end of this 1,000 years, they're somewhere else. And Satan has been, see, it's sort of a gray area, but here we are. And this is just one more verse before I make my point here. This is just another verse talking about there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. Now, again, here we are. We have, starting in like the mid 1850s, we start getting images of cities that have way too many structures, and they seem to be virtually empty. And then all of a sudden, there are orphans and foundlings and orphans, and it seems like that we didn't build these structures, and it seems like they belong to a different people, but we just sort of showed up. No one really knows where. Most people can't trace their genealogies prior to 1850. I know some can. That might be explained by this previous group. There were some humans living in this millennium. But it's just, I know it's a leap, but you start looking at our current situation, and it does seem like the nations are being deceived. Like, behind everything, every sort of everything around us is a lie. So you kind of start looking, are the nations being deceived? Seems like it. Did a bunch of people show up that we can't explain, living in cities that appear to be empty that we don't seem to have built? Kind of seems like that.
She'll use the excess to forge whistling birds.
Whistling birds will do well. Reserve some for the foundlings.
As it should always be. The foundlings are the future. This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.